Morgan. Hi, Morgan Hoesterey. Thank you for being here on the Passion Project.
Thanks for having me. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, super stoked to be here. This is going to be super fun. We were just having a fun chat. Excuse me. So it's pretty cool. You're already giggling at me. What's fun is I've known you for a long time, bits and pieces, and I think like a lot of people, I've known more about you than known you. But over the years, we've got to know each other. We just had a good chance to hang out in Hawaii, which is super fun. We'll talk about. But I'm just going to go straight into the intro. Like, who's Morgan? Well, we met a friend this morning, a woman named Tina, came over and tapped you on the shoulder and goes, "Are you a swimmer?"
Yeah, that does happen to me a lot. When you grow up as a swimmer, you end up with really big shoulders, so you're pretty easily identifiable to people, which is exactly what happened at Pete's this morning.
Yes.
It's kind of a badge of honor, though. It's nice, unless you have to wear a bridesmaid's dress. That's the only time that it's a really big hassle.
You know what? Those are things that guys wouldn't think about, but I can imagine it's a little challenging to find stuff that fits just right.
Yeah, it makes you look a little bit like a linebacker, but it's fine.
It's okay. Nobody's going to mess with you.
It's all good, yeah.
It's all good. And you haven't stopped using those shoulders. Excuse me. So we'll talk a lot about what you did and what you do today and all the cool stuff you've done in between, which is really amazing. So if you don't know Morgan, and a lot of people do because of your history in the paddling world, but it goes way back beyond that, and you kind of just inferred that with the paddle and the shoulders. But the way I see it, Morgan, well, from the outside world, Morgan, you are a monster on the water, in the water, and under the water. I mean, you do a lot of stuff on all three, which is cool, leveraging the ocean in a lot of ways, which we'll talk about. I always say in this that, I love the opportunity to talk to really cool people that do really cool things. And in some cases, it's really badass people that do really badass things. And you've got bits of both because of what you've done from a swimming perspective is really big. So high school swimming, collegiate swimming, sub-Olympic, which we'll talk about too, because there's an interesting story in there. And then you pivoted to world-class paddling, lots of stuff underwater, and you're still doing a lot of that stuff. You've got some gnarly adventure racing chops that I've just heard bits and pieces of that story, so we're going to talk about that for sure because it sounds gnarly. And today, Patty, freedive instructor, you teach people CO2 tolerant, so breath hold stuff for both kids and adults. You have like 2 different businesses that really cater to that. You do work in that space with other folks, which we got to see you do firsthand in Hawaii with the United States Lifeguard Association, which was really neat. And so it's just really, really cool. And then a lot of your stuff's been captured on film. Like you've been, I think, kind of caught by BBC and Nat Geo and Outside Television. So really, really neat. And again, there's a lot of that I know, but there's a ton that I don't. And that's really kind of the goal for today is to unpack some of that.
Wow, you made me sound so cool. I was like, ooh, this man.
You're like, who is he talking about?
I know. I was like, I'm so cool.
That's
I'm not
you.
that cool, but
No.
Yeah.
Hey, Tina at coffee this morning thought you were that
Tina
cool. Tina
thinks
sure.
I'm cool. Yeah,
for sure.
I appreciate that about
was
Tina.
Fun. And then I mentioned we were in Hawaii, but we also got to paddle the Catalina Channel shortly thereafter. And you've done the Catalina Channel a couple times in the last couple months. So just really cool stories. We're going to get into that because you've done it with totally different groups, kind of as a coach, ambassador, leader. So super neat. So
it's an addiction problem, but you have the same one, so you know exactly how it is.
I do, 100%.
Yeah.
But we get to
this
talk
is why
about
we're
you.
friends. Yeah,
totally, 100%. So that's the setup, and it's a pretty elaborate and really cool one. But let's start at the beginning. So we're here in the Costa Mesa, Newport Beach area. You didn't grow up very far. So talk about where you grew up, and let's go from there.
Okay, well, I grew up in Irvine. I grew up as a swimmer. My whole life from the time I was 9 was 2-a-days swimming, and I tried to make the Olympic team for a long time. I grew up in like kind of a heyday of USA swimming, with like Amanda Beard and Staciana Stitz and Erin Pearsall and Jason Lezak. So when all of these like super high level Olympians were coming out of Orange County, they were all coming from my team, and I got to train with them every day. So it like kind of pushed me forward.
Which team was that?
At the time it was the Irvine Novaquatics. Now it's just the Novaquatics. And I trained with Dave Salo for a long time. There was another coach, Brent Lorenzen, who was like pretty instrumental in me becoming like a higher level swimmer. And so those 2 people kind of like helped shape my underwater life really in an indirect sort of way. So growing up as a swimmer, I was always super proficient in the ocean. The Olympic thing was cool, and but when I was done trying to make the Olympic team, I was really done with swimming. And as most swimmers do, you could sort of become a little resistant to the pool. And when that happened, I transitioned more into like the underwater fun having, like the freediving and more surfing and all of the things that I never had time to do before. And it took me a couple of years to get to paddling, actually. It started, freediving came first.
Oh.
Surfing came second, and then I ended up as a surf instructor, which then led me to stand up, which I was really resistant to. My boss at the surf school was like, "Hey, I'm transitioning into this like stand up paddle rental situation. Will you come with me?" And I was like, "Yeah, right." And so since I was doing that with her, I was like, "Well, I might as well like learn how to do it." And then that like shot my life off in like a whole different direction.
Rad. Okay. That was a much better introduction than I did. So that was awesome. But that really shines a light on exactly where we're going. Sorry about that. Okay. So everybody just heard this pretty cool fast paced approach where you went. We're going to slow it down and go through the same thing, but with a little bit more detail. So you grew up in Irvine. How did you get into swimming at 9 years old? Like,
I have been told I'm like a special needs giraffe on land.
I've heard this once or twice from you.
I am very awkward on land. Like as I navigate through my life, I'm super awkward. And so I tried, soccer and baseball and whatever, all the things when I was little, but none of it stuck because it was all land things. And I was so ridiculous on land that I couldn't do any of them. So swimming always came really naturally. I mean, I learned to swim when I was 6 weeks old. I was swimming way before I was walking. And my dad was a big water guy, so swimming just was like a natural evolution for me. I tried water polo, but I didn't really enjoy like the human interaction of that. Most people think it's super boring, but I love following the black line. It's meditative. It's like me by myself, which I love. I'm kind of a hermit sometimes. But yeah, so swimming just came really naturally, and then I was inherently just kind of good at it. And so that's kind of how that started.
How did it, at 6 weeks, is this because your dad was a water guy that he just threw, like, how did it start?
I think the safety piece of it was always really important to my parents. And my mom will say that, and she still says now, that I went to an Australian swim school. So what they do is they take babies and they just throw them in the water and like let you learn how to do it on your own. And both my parents said that when I came up, I was like purple and like spitting out water or whatever. And they said it was like the most horrifying thing they've ever seen. But I'm so grateful that they got me into the water when they did. Because, I mean, me being able to swim has been the foundation of everything good that has ever happened in my life.
God, that's so rad. Super interesting. And thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting to see how people end up where. I've heard you say the quote before. I heard it a little bit differently last time. It was something along the lines of being, I'm pretty competent in the water, but like I'm a clumsy giraffe on land.
Yeah. I mean, if you see footage of me running, it's like, Phoebe and Friends, or like I'm just awkward.
Well, I get it. I mean, I've spent most of my time in the water, and I was doing a lot of running, but my wife would always go, I can always tell it to you because it looks like it hurts.
Yeah. Well, gravity is unpleasant, right? When you're used to being in the water and you don't have to deal with it, gravity is really terrible.
Yeah, listen, it just reinforces where we're going. You nailed it, like where you've gone. So let's talk more. So you're swimming competitively in high school. You go to school. Which schools did you go to in Irvine?
I went to university. I went to Irvine High School, and then I went to the University of Hawaii.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah, when I was swimming in high school, I had a coach that, at the time, Dave Salo, he was kind of progressive in his way of thinking. Swimmers when I was doing it in like the 90s, it was all about yardage, right? Everybody was doing 10,000 yards a day swimming or whatever. And I had this one coach that was like, why are we going to swim slow for this amount of time? If you swim slow, all it's going to do is teach you how to swim slow. So let's swim fast for a shorter period of time. And it was a really good way to train. And at the time, there was one coach, Sam Freeze in Hawaii, that was training the same way. So I wanted to go train with him for that reason.
It's so smart. It's really interesting. I just listened to a Rich Roll podcast with one of the elite running coaches, and this guy went out and ran his first 100-miler, and he won it. And the whole podcast is talking about he trained to go fast and shorter. He never did it over, he was doing 20-milers, never did over a 50, and he goes out and wins the Leadville 100-miler, which is one of the most iconic. But he trained to go fast. Totally broke the whole paradigm on how to train. Sounds like it wasn't a new idea because that's what you were doing 20 years ago.
Well, I mean, at the time, it was, like I said, Dave was super progressive. He was the only guy that was doing it, and everyone thought that he was crazy because they're like, well, you have to, we've always done the yardage. We've always done this. And he was like, well, so what? We've always done it. Why don't we do this a different way? And it's really interesting now because I was a sprinter when I was a swimmer. I swam the 50 free, the 100 breaststroke, and maybe the 200 IM if I had to. So being from like a sprinty thing, it's funny now that I do like endurance things, but I train for endurance the same way you just said that guy did, is I'd rather spend an hour doing intervals at a higher pace than go paddle for like 5 hours. Your body will get you there. It's like the long, slow paddles or...
I need to learn because I do the exact opposite. I've trained myself to be slow in everything I do. I go lots of distance and I go relatively slow. It's like the LSD, it's the long, slow distance is kind of how I've always trained. And guess what? That's the pace I've got.
Right.
Like I can't go faster than that. And so I've trained myself to be slow by my terms. And it's interesting between you and this other podcast, it's totally making me think like, maybe I don't need to go spend 4 hours out there tomorrow morning.
You can get more out of a 1 hour interval workout than you can in 4 hours. And you don't have to sit and do like zone 2 for 4 hours. Although the zone 2 the 4 hour paddles are super useful too, but as you know. But the sprinty ones are a little bit more fun. And for people like us who like to, like you're a mover, right? We were just saying about strapping the boards. You don't like to sit and watch people do it for you. You like to do things. I think the sprinting is good for that. Super
interesting. All right. Well, I got to start rethinking everything I've been doing for the last 50 years. That's good to know. So you end up in UH. Was collegiate swimming just part of the path from high school swimming? Real quickly, we'll go back to college. You have some pretty big accolades from your high school swimming career. What were some of your high points?
I was a high school All-American, and then as CIF, I think I won some events at CIF. The problem with high school is, like I was saying, I grew up in this heyday of USA Swimming. So the two best, I was a 100 breaststroker was my best event. The two best 100 breaststrokers in the world were also on my team.
Oh gosh.
So it was one of those things where it's like, no matter how hard you tried, there's always these like your white whales above you, So high school, I think that I didn't do anything where I thought that like, oh, this is super cool, just because they were always there and I was always third, and I was like, when you're 17 years old, that kind of messes with your head a little bit.
Did that mess with you?
Oh, for sure. I think most of my mental problems as an adult, and there are quite a few of them, stem from the fact that was, you try as hard as you can or whatever, and you can just like never get there. And so there's like, without turning this into a therapy session, there's like some stuff to unpack there for sure. But yeah, but when I went to college, all of a sudden I kind of came into my own. I got faster, I got stronger. I started lifting weights, which helped me a lot. And it sort of elevated my swimming to a different level. So I claim more of my college things than my high school things. So in college, I was a NC2A All-American, which I'm super proud of.
So rad.
And then I went to U.S. Olympic trials 3 times, and that was awesome. And so I don't know. I got to do some pretty high-level things in the swimming world, but ultimately it was I'm super grateful for the path that swimming has given me, but I was also super grateful to see it go. I was like, okay, I'm done here.
Well, I can imagine at that level. My world of sports was always lower, but there was always people I was never going to, on the rarest day I might catch them once, but for the most part, they're always going to get me every single time. I can imagine, especially when you're aiming for something. So was your goal always the Olympics ultimately?
Yes, but I think that was because I thought that was just what I was supposed to do. When you're 9 years old, the whole time you're like, okay, you're training to be an Olympian, and I just bought into it. I was like, sure, okay. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was like, I never woke up with like this Olympic dream, It was never one of those things where I was like, I want to be a gold medalist, but since I was swimming all the time and I was around all these like high level athletes that's what they were doing, I was like, cool, well, this is like our path or whatever. My parents were always super supportive of my swimming career, but when my mom always said, you don't have to get a job as long as swimming is your job. And I think the biggest goal there was to just get a scholarship to college and pay for college. I know for me that was important. I didn't want my parents to have to pay for it. So I was like, okay, well, this is a way that I can like contribute and give back,
And is that what happened?
That is what happened. I got a full ride to the University of Hawaii,
Awesome.
Which was like a dream come true. It's funny, when I went there, I was like, okay, I'm only going to go for 4 years, like 4 years, and then I'll come back because I'm close to my family and I didn't want to leave. But then I spent like 2 weeks in Hawaii. I was like, okay, I don't think I'm ever leaving this place. And so then I stayed for 15 years.
Which is going to be very formative, and we'll talk a lot about
Yes.
that. So, like you said, swimming was kind of the path, but the fact that it got you to Hawaii, and then Hawaii opened your eyes to all this other stuff that you could do using your swim background, your training background, pretty amazing. You had mentioned it, like you don't mind the black line. Like, do you like the training aspect of sport?
I do.
You do?
Yeah, I enjoy the training much more than the competing. To be honest with you, I think just based on like the trauma, quote unquote, that I've always said about like my mental problems stemming from the high school. I don't enjoy competition because I don't enjoy not winning. And I know how that sounds. It sounds really terrible. But I don't think it's fun to lose. I am really hard on myself. So when I'm not doing well, I take it really hard. But training is an opportunity to learn, and it's an opportunity to push myself. And I think we're friends, and we're friends with all of the people that we're friends with because we all use training in the ocean as a way to regulate whatever's happening in our lives. Like you said it before, you feel normal after going paddling for 3 hours. I feel the same way. Like my whole life, I've been an anxious person. I have a depressive personality, but the ocean and paddling and sports has always been the way that I've like dealt with that.
Yeah,
so I love the training, to go back to your question.
No, it's a great response. It's super interesting because we had talked offline when we were talking earlier, like it's the story I've told it once or twice here, but like, yes, I probably have ADD. Randy would say, yes, put an H in there. I've got ADHD, but for my whole life, I've done endurance stuff. Since I was little, I started going long early on. Just because I enjoyed it. I didn't realize it was probably helping me self-regulate. And as you've gotten further on, and I'm foreshadowing where we're going with like the breath hold, CO2 tolerance stuff, a lot of that is about regulating, self-regulating, managing stress, et cetera else. So really interesting that you're still in that world of both doing it probably personally, but also helping others navigate that through the need. Listen, we're in a stressful world, lots of things, regardless of what it is, but really interesting to see that you've found the path is the training, is the endurance, is the nature. Those are all, like, again, if we listen to any podcast or any professional, they talk about, if you want to get better, get with an exercise, get outside, find a group, do your gratitude. Like, and there's no better place to have like moments of gratitude when you're out on the channel, out on the ocean, wherever you may be, or underwater, right?
For sure.
Very soothing. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's go back to this Olympic part. So your full ride at UH, which is a dream come true. Was the college experience pretty cool for you, or is it all swimming with some school thrown in?
It was all swimming. It was all swimming with some school thrown in, but the school part, I actually have always loved school, which is weird because most people don't say that. But I wanted to be a vet, so I did zoology and biochemistry were my two majors. And so I did have to spend a fair amount of time like focusing on the school bit, but it wasn't all just work. I mean, college was awesome. For everything that I hated about high school, college was different. I went there and it was like I had a group of friends on the swim team, and I mean I did in high school too, but college was they were all like-minded and they all liked doing what I did. So I met like my most favorite friend. Her name is Sonia, and she and I both like to free dive, so whenever we could, we'd go out and like free dive and swim through caves and do whatever. And so like I met sort of like my core friend group in college. So college was great. I loved it.
Awesome.
When I realized that they would pay for 5 years, I started slowing all the school down. I was like, okay, you'll pay for 5, so I'm not leaving until you actually kick me out.
Got it. And did you swim all 5 years?
Yes, but I redshirted my 4th year because I had like a knee injury. I had this, I had a hematoma in my knee that I had to get removed. And so I redshirted that year. But I was kind of winding down at that point anyway. So the swimming had become less important and the fun having had become a little bit more important.
Got it. And when you're at that level, and you talked a bit about the Olympics and you went out for it, at what point, was that early in college? Because it sounds like you were winding down. So when were you pursuing the Olympic aspect?
From 96 to 2004.
So all the way through.
Yeah. So every time, I was there. Or 96, I hadn't made trials, but so 2000, 2004, I think were like the big years that I was seriously trying. And I remember being at Olympic trials and just like standing behind the blocks, like looking around, because it's a whole different scene than any other pool, right? It's dark, you're inside, and it's like cameras, and I just remember being like, ooh, this is like really a lot of pressure. I don't know how I feel about this.
Well, we talked a little bit about that earlier today too. Like, we were talking to this woman at coffee, and you're like, afterwards she left, and she was high energy and super interested in you, but you're like, what did you tell me?
My hands got all clammy. She had so much energy, and she was like, "Oh, you're so cool," and it like made me nervous. I was like, "Stop assaulting me with your nice words."
She was very sweet.
Yeah, she was great, but my palms were sweaty after talking to her. It was just, I don't know what it is. It's like one of those things where people come and are like, "Oh, you whatever," and I'm like, no, you have me wrong. It's fine. I'm the wall. Don't look at me.
Well, I think again, we'll talk more about it too. But like when you talk, you even said like. We talked about like spectrum-y stuff, like my view of the world.
Oh, my neurodivergency?
Yes.
Yeah.
But everybody's somewhere on that, right? And so we all have these attributes that cause us to react to whatever, however we do. But it's interesting because for what we were just talking about, underwater, on the water, out there, those are all super soothing elements. Nature, ocean. I mean, there's so many studies about the power of being in the water. And then you do that, off the coast of Hawaii, and we'll talk about that. But like all of those things help us self-regulate. Then you go underwater, which is even more so. So like it seems like you've spent a lot of your life focused on those things that help make us as humans feel good.
Yeah, it's funny, without going off on too much of a tangent, when we paddled in Hawaii recently, you and I, the day before that, I did a downwinder by myself. And it's interesting, like sometimes in life, I feel like I don't fit, I'm sure that everybody feels that at some point, but recently I've really been like feeling that way. And I'm like, I'm not 100% sure where I fit in all of this. And so I go to Hawaii and I can't find anybody to play with me. So I was super bummed and I wasn't sure if I could go and whatever. So I ended up like figuring out how to do a downwinder by myself with like Ubering and whatever. So, but when I was out there, it took about like 5 minutes and I was like, this is where I fit. Mm-hmm. And I had this moment where I was I was super emotional. I'm like crying doing my downwinder, but it was like fun tears because I was like, no, this is where I fit. And so it was this moment where in the last 6 months, I've really been struggling with like, I don't know, like if I'm doing the right thing or, as humans, we all do that. But in that moment out there by myself in the middle of the ocean, I was like, this is it. This is where I fit. It was it was a really cool feeling actually.
And you got to go, you did 3 days in a row, right?
I did. Yeah. I like roped you guys into coming with me.
It wasn't much of a rope. We were begging. Can we please go with you?
I know.
Right?
It was easy to get you guys to go, but we just should have done that second one.
I know. Well, there's some funny stories there that I won't digress on,
Yes.
but like try to paddle a surf ski with a rental kayak paddle. Doesn't work super well. That was my experience on day one until we tracked down another one. Funny stuff. It was super fun. That was my first Hawaii Kai run. I know I'm getting ahead, but I've done a lot of paddling over there. I'd never done Hawaii Kai, which is pretty iconic if you're a paddler. That was my first time. So you, me, and Danny Nichols got to go do that, and super, super fun. And everybody's like, oh, it was a shitty day. I was like, it was world class.
It was not. It was great. It was really fun.
Super fun. I want to go back to the Olympics real quick. So you went after it. You got very close. How close did you get? And talk about that real quick.
I don't know. Talking about the getting close sort of like bothers me a little bit.
Okay, let's not talk about it.
No. How dare you ask me such hard questions? But my takeaway from the swimming thing, and this came from like years later, where another random lady like Tina, who we met this morning, came up to me and she was like, "You look like a swimmer. Were you an Olympian?" And I was like, No, but I was close. And then she was like, what did she say? She was like, well, that wasn't your path. And she was like this like empathetic, like empath person. She was like, but I can see that wasn't for you. She was like, and this is like some random woman I met at like a Starbucks. And she was like, I see for you that if you were to have gone in that direction, it would have sent your life on one way. But I can see that the way that your life has turned is the way that you're supposed to go. And then she like walked away. I was like, well, that was heavy.
Magic. How cool is that?
Yeah, I was up in Tahoe and Truckee, which is a good place to run into someone like that. But and then I remember sitting there and I was like, oh my God, that was crazy. But true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about that? Like what might have been had you gone to the Olympics? Yeah.
No, only just because what I'm doing now, I feel like everything that I've done, every weird job and every opportunity that life has given me has led me to this point, and I'm so stoked on that.
Hallelujah.
Yeah,
and
it's really cool.
We're going to dig into it because it's so cool. Real quickly, you said you have degrees in biology and zoology. Mm-hmm. What was the goal? You said you wanted to be a vet. Is that where?
Yeah.
What happened there? What
I worked at a vet's office for 2 weeks, and I was like, there's no way I can handle this. I can't put pets to sleep. What was wild was how many people were coming in Hawaii, and they'd be like, this dog's a little too much. I can't take it anymore. Can you just put it to sleep? And it was making me hate people. And I was like, I'm turning into a monster. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll go into like dolphin training or whatever, because that sounded cool. And so I got a job at the Kahala Hotel at a thing called Dolphin Quest, and I worked there for 1 day. And when I saw what goes behind dolphin training, I was like, I don't think this is for me either. I didn't know a lot about it, and I still don't really have any judgments about it or anything, but I just knew it wasn't for me. So
yeah, it's super interesting. My daughter just went through this. I always say that the best thing that can happen is to figure those things out fast.
Yes.
Because going through school for 4 years or 5 years with 2 degrees or whatever in that stuff, just to find out afterward, you're like, ooh, I don't like this. You're like, gosh, had I figured that out when I was a freshman, would I have changed my direction in school?
Totally.
But at the same time, I've got 2 degrees. I don't use either of them as a business. I mean, I use the skills, but they're not formative in my day-to-day life. But I left college because of it. So,
and college is such a great time for everybody. It's like, you know, you're 20 years old and you got the world at your fingertips, you know, and it's just fun. But it's ridiculous that they make you choose what you're going to do with the rest of your life when you're 19 years old. It's absolutely absurd. Yeah. Same. I mean, I did 4 years of organic chemistry, and now I play with kids in a pool for a living. But what's cool is the biochemistry has come back around with like the CO2 tolerance and stuff. Imagine. So and what college teaches you is how to work for somebody else. College teaches you how to do something in somebody else's way, which I do think is a really useful life skill.
Yeah, I wasn't very good at that part of it. That's why I had to go well. For a while I did. Okay, so we go on. So let's pivot now. This is kind of, you graduate, you got these degrees, you figure out you don't want to go to vet school, you don't want to be a dolphin trainer. I thought I wanted to be that too because I have a marine science background. I did that for a little bit in San Diego. So you get to this point. You're done with swimming, which has been your path for 20 years at that point, or darn close, every day. You're done with school, which has been full-time for 5 years. And when you're in sciences, you're doing labs, like that's a lot of hours. So between pool and all the chemical or the chemistry, biology stuff, you're spending a lot of time. And then you're done with both at the same time. Right. What happens?
It's an interesting question. I think any athlete will tell you there's this period of like complete, you don't even know who you are. It's like your identity has been gone. And for me, like I said, I started doing 2-a-days when I was 9. I was told that I was going to make the Olympics, you know, not told that I was, but that was my path. From the time I was 9 years old, I had somebody telling me what to do, and I knew when I was going to be somewhere, what time I needed to be there. And then all of a sudden, when all that's gone, you're like, cool. I can sleep until noon every day and nobody's going to say anything. So I think for a lot of athletes, it's a really interesting transition. And I was really grateful, like during my transition, I found paddling, and paddling filled that like competitive void. So that was kind of the jump to that. I ultimately got a job on a boat. I started as like a naturalist on like a whale and dolphin watching boat, and then they helped me get up to getting my commercial captain's license.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I started off as a naturalist, like deckhand, whatever, and then so I like had all this boat time. So they're like, well, why don't you go get your captain's license, and then you can eventually drive the boat. So I went and got my captain's license, and then I ended up leaving that job because another opportunity came, the BBC thing that you mentioned, but. That was my professional part. But then because I was this naturalist on the boat, I got to freedive every day with dolphins and turtles. And I was like, this is better. This is where I should be. And then kind of along at the same time as that, I was working at the surf school that was my job. That was how I was making money. And then the stand-up thing happened. And when the stand-up thing, it like sent my life off into a whole different direction.
Okay, but let's press pause for a second and go back to, you got your captain's license. You spent a lot of time on boats, and there was a mantra that you guys had. What was the mantra that you had for you and Whitney Erickson?
Oh, no boys on the boat? Yeah. Yeah. Well, Whitney is a special human, and she's very capable. And so we were always like, well, between the two of us, we don't need any boys. And so my dad passed away a few years ago, and when he passed away, he left me a sailboat. And so Whitney and I started going to Catalina on said sailboat, and then we'd show up in the moorings, and we'd be like heckled by these guys, and they're like, how are you even going to moor that thing without any boys on the boat? And that's where the no boys on the boat thing started. We're like, we don't need the boys.
No. You're like, do you have any idea who you're talking to right now? Because Whitney's a badass as well. Okay, real quick. You mentioned your dad. Mm-hmm. I think I've heard bits and pieces that he was a big influence.
Yeah, so both my parents were huge influences on me, but my dad was the water guy. My mom was the kind of nurturer, make sure that I get to swim team, like responsible human, whereas my dad was like the water guy. And so I just wanted to be just like him. Everything he was doing, I wanted to do. He was like my best friend. He taught me how to surf. He taught me how to freedive. He was a fisherman. And unfortunately, he ended up with ALS, which was like horrifying. But the good part is that's actually why I came back from Hawaii, was to spend time with him before he was gone. And I'm grateful now for being back, because it has like sent my life again in another direction. But it was cool being able to spend like his end of life time, and I got to talk to him about a lot of things. And he was really big into like endurance things too. As much as he was an ocean guy, he climbed Mount Whitney a lot. And so he would always tell me about how you need to be the one who helps everybody else get up the mountain. Don't be the guy that has to be there first. He's like, no one cares about that guy. Like, be the guy helping everybody else. So he's been so like everything that I do now was because he taught me to do it.
Rad.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, what you just said is what I think of you, which is help everybody else get where they're going. And
that's really nice.
We'll talk about that because, that's what you do with watergrounds and waterlogged, and that's what you did with open water with the channel crossings when you help everybody get. We'll talk about, but that's exactly who I see you as, and there's a great story that our friend Danny Nichols likes to tell about that, which we will definitely uncover. So you were, and have you did you do anything with the captain's license? I just love that you just like, I'm going to go that's no small feat. To get your captain's license.
It's one of those things I was like, well, I can do it, so might as well go do it. And I didn't really do anything with it, but I am grateful now that I do have the sailboat. So the captain's license gave me an opportunity. So now I know how to safely operate it. I feel like I can get somewhere, so that's nice. And then I don't know, my time on that boat was so awesome because it's like, I always feel like in life, opportunities present themselves. And if you're present enough to see the opportunity, it's going to send you in a direction that you need to go. So like the boat was the biggest thing that came from the boat is I met some producers from Animal Planet and the BBC, and they saw me freediving and they're like, hey, can you do you have any like camera experience? And I was like, not really. And so they hand me this like big like expensive camera. They're like, well, go down there, get some footage and see what you think, and then we'll look at it and we'll see what you think. And then so I did that and I came up and then they were like, well, we'd like you to come work with us. So that was awesome. So I was like, cool. So that sent me in a different direction too. So
we'll talk more about that because I don't know. I knew just scratched the surface on it, but can you tell more about that experience?
Yeah, so it was a project. It was called A Message in the Waves. It was a documentary about the impacts of marine plastics in the ocean. And so they chose like 3 characters. Jack Johnson was one of them. This guy from Maui who was like this like Hawaiian, you know how Hawaiians, like when you listen to them talk, it's like words of wisdom that you've never heard before. So he was like that guy. And then they needed a 3rd character that was like a blonde surfer girl. So as it turns out, I'm really horrible on camera. So I went and instead of having me be an underwater person, they had me audition to be the 3rd person in this thing. Yeah. And so I went and auditioned and I could tell from the producer's face that I was blowing it. And then so when it was over, I was like, okay, listen, I know that didn't go well, but that's fine. I was like, I would love to be involved with what you guys are doing in any way. If you want me to get your coffee, clean your cameras, carry your stuff, whatever you want me to do, I'm in and I'll do it for free. Just, I want to come like learn about what you're doing. And so I became really good friends with the producers. They're like, great, well, you start tomorrow, we'll pay you. And so they paid me to be like an assistant. And then as time went on, the girl that they had chosen to be in it for whatever reason, she ended up not working out. And so the one producer was like, more like, I don't care how bad you are on camera, you're in, you just got promoted. So then I ended up being like this 3rd character in this documentary. But it was cool. We got to go to Midway, which was one of the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, and see the all the Laysan albatross. So every year, these like big, majestic, well, they call them goonie birds because on land they're just completely ridiculous.
So interesting.
I love it because it's just like me, and so they're like my favorite bird. But then they get up in the air and they're so majestic and beautiful. But every year, like literally millions of these birds end up on Midway, and they have their chicks, and then they kind of like proliferate their community. But what's really sad is the impact of plastic. So while you're walking around Midway, you're stepping over like thousands and thousands of like dead birds that are decomposing, and like in the skeleton is just like all these plastics. It's so wild. Like just, it gives me goosebumps just like thinking about it. It was the most eye-opening experience I think that I've ever had in my life in terms of like what us as humans, the impact that we've had on the planet, which is wild. So that was a big learning opportunity for me.
Yeah. Well, we could go down a whole rabbit hole of
Right.
that. And there's been a lot of people on this podcast that are really focused on trying to resolve that in many different ways. But it's amazing because that's this remote, beautiful island. Now, it's got a big history from World War II as well. I think they bombed the heck out of it as a test run or whatever. But yeah, when you see that, you're like, oh, I'm going to one of the most beautiful places on earth. You're like, this is not what's supposed to happen.
Right.
Ugh, I didn't know that. But what a cool experience. What else? Did you do more work with BBC? Or was it a one-time thing?
Well, so that was a one-time thing. It was just for that documentary. It ended up airing on Animal Planet. I think you can still look it up on YouTube or whatever. But
What's it called?
Hawaii, A Message in the Waves.
Cool.
They did a great job. I mean, it was a great documentary. So after that, what happened? BBC. Oh, so then they were like, well, you are pretty good with a camera and you're a good storyteller. So they ended up sending me to the Travel Channel at the time was doing like a video creator seminar thing. And it was at the, you know, when like the digital revolution started, when people started blogging about everything or like vlogging about everything or whatever. So they basically taught us how to make little travel videos. And so that was cool. And that's where I met Chris Aguilar, who was the guy who would go on to film like Destination 3 Degrees. And he has Finn Film Media is his media company. And he's very talented. And we became friends. But from that, I started doing content for magazines and whatever. And that became my job. So again, like when life hands you like situations, you can make them an opportunity. And this one, so then I was going on paddling adventures and making videos about it or whatever, and then that's sort of like how I ended up making my living, which was really fun.
Yeah.
That was really cool.
And just a key, like Chris Aguilar's a stud. We love Chris. What a great guy. Okay, so is this where we start talking about stand-up and paddling? It sounds like this is where it kind of all started to kind of come together.
Yes.
Because you didn't just like everything else. It seems like everything in your life, I want to get good at, like some people get into sports and they just want to dabble and go enjoy it. Like it seems like you enjoy the path to mastery. Is that really kind of the Morgan way is like, I don't want to just go do it. I want to go do it and get good at it.
Yeah. Well, yes.
I want to get my boat license. I want to get
I don't need to be the best one at it, but what I do, kind of my goal in life is whenever anybody's doing anything fun and they want to play, I want to be in good enough shape that I can go play with them. I don't need to be the first one, but I don't want to be the last one. I don't want to be someone who's like holding everybody back. So I try to stay, it's like the big joke how I'm like channel ready all the time. I'm like, you want to go prone? Great. I'm slow, but let's go. You want to go stand up? OC1? Let's do it. Like I have like super FOMO and I don't want to be left out.
This
is why we're friends. I know that about you.
Yeah, always be ready. Like, well, Mark, why do you train so hard? So I can say yes.
I don't want to have to say no, and I don't want to have to like watch you guys go have fun, and I'm like sitting on the couch because I was lazy, which I am, by the way. But like, still, at least I'm lazy, but I can go.
All right, I think most people just roll their eyes. Yeah, Morgan's lazy. I've just heard half the story that lazy's not there. But let me ask you a question about training. And do you like to train in the mornings?
No. Ew, mornings?
I'm guessing after 20 years of training every stinking morning when you finished
I
swimming.
think that's the thing. I think because I woke up at 5 a.m. for 25 years, my body is just like, absolutely not. We do not wake up at this time of the day. So I'm pretty good at like 10:30. I like to get up, have my coffee, walk my dog, and then I can train. But I mean, I'm not a 6 a.m. trainer.
You don't want to come paddle the Willie workout with us at 5:45?
I do want to come paddle with you guys, but I just can't. Well, I won't do it. I can do it. I won't do it. Yeah.
Hey, listen, there's much more civilized times to paddle and to play than in the dark. But
right. It's like my big joke is like, ew, there's a 6 in the morning too. There's 2 of these every day. Like.
That's one of the reputations of Morgan these days is like, yeah, just don't ask her to do anything at 6 in the morning.
No, I mean, Joe Bark used to call me when I was in Hawaii, and my phone would ring at like 6:30, and I'm like, I knew who it was, and then I'd pick up the phone. He's like, is it the princess or the pirate? I was like, what do you think? It's early. It's definitely the pirate.
That sounds like Joe.
Yeah.
We love Joe. That's so funny. All right, let's pivot into paddling. So there was this thing called stand-up that you got very, very well. I'm just going to turn it over to you. So you talked about how the paddling started after some of this BBC, Animal Planet type stuff. But how did you get introduced to stand-up? Because that's a big part of you.
Well, because that manager, when I was at the surf school, she was like, you're responsible. Will you come with me? She's like, all of these other degenerates, like they're of no service to me. So like, will you come with me? And to be honest with you,
with her to do what?
She started a new retail store. It was called Wet Feet. It was Karen LaRue and her brother, Jeff Chang. And Jeff Chang is one of the most like underrated watermen that has ever walked the earth. I just think that he's like the coolest. But anyway, so they started this like stand-up paddle retail store where they did rentals and tours and whatever. And
on Oahu?
On Oahu, out of Aina. And working at that store, I didn't know anything about stand-up. And like I said before, I was pretty resistant to it. I was like, I have free diving, I have surfing. I don't have time for this. I got the boat thing. And then one day we were in the retail store and Jeff Chang and this other guy were talking about Molokai. And I had no idea what it was. I'd never heard about it before. I didn't know that people did such a thing.
So hold on. So the whole time that you were UH swimming and surfing and you didn't know, and
I had no idea.
You never heard about the Molokai channel or anything about it?
No, I knew nothing. Well, I mean, I knew that like prone paddling was a thing. And then stand up, I was like, I don't know, everyone's going to hate me if I go stand up surfing, whatever. And like, as somebody who cares what people think about me, I was like, I can't do that. I'm just going to stay with longboarding, whatever. But so I'm in the store, I'm working at the store. So I had started learning a little bit about stand up and still like Molokai hadn't really come across my radar. So these two guys were sitting there talking about it, and it was in 2008. So Jeff Chang was going to do it for the first time on stand up. And that year, there had already been like a guy, Kevin Horgan, that had been doing it. But there were only like 8 guys that had done it stand up ever.
So early stand up, and prone had the M2O, the Molokai to Oahu
yeah,
race.
The prone race was already going on.
And they were starting to jump in on that race at that time.
They were, yeah. So it was kind of the early days of adding stand up to it. And then so I heard these guys talking and I was like, that sounds so cool. And then I like looked at Jeff and I was like, do you think that if I trained, I could do that race? And then the other guy that was with him, like we call him the he who shall not be named guy, he looked at me like straight in the face and was like, that's a race for watermen. You could never do that race. And I was like, oh, really?
You don't know Morgan.
Well, and that's how stand-up started for me. And this was in March of 2008. In July of 2008, I did Molokai for the first time.
Did you beat that guy?
No, but he did have to hand me the check for, I was the only girl that did it. So he had to hand me the check for, at the time it was $500 for winning. And it was like one of the best moments of my whole life because he had to like give me the check. And I was like,
so you were the first woman to do Molokai stand up?
Solo, but this is another thing that I have like a hard time claiming because Andrea Moeller, who I have like the utmost respect for, in terms of like women in the ocean, I just think that she's at the top. I think she's the coolest. And she and another woman, Maria Souza, they had done it as a team. And I was the first girl to do it solo, but that was only just because I got there first.
That's okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's it wasn't one of those things where I set out to be like, oh, I'm going to be the first one.
I'm not claiming any.
I know. It's just
there's no tiara for this, but it's a pretty cool thing that it just, even if it's just by chance that you were the first solo woman in the M2O to do stand up. That's amazing.
Well, yeah, and what's an also fun
and
fact
you won
of it, you can only beat the people that show up.
That's right.
But what's extra funny about that is both Jeff Chang and I. So when I kind of back to that conversation, Jeff looked at me and you could tell he was like shaking his head because he knew what had just happened. Yes. And then so when the other guy left, I was like, so he's Let's like, go. Yes, I'll help you. And then so we basically like had these like boards that were like windsurfing boards. They were so narrow and they were really small and no rudder, nothing. Because it was such the early days that we didn't know what we didn't know. And so we started doing Hawaii Kai runs or whatever, and I would just like chase after these guys, and they were so gracious to let me go with them, and I will forever appreciate all of it. Because I was like, same as I told you and Danny when you guys were on OCs, I was like, please just go, I'll be fine. Like, do not stop and feel like you have to baby me. So for those months, I just like followed them around like a little baby duck. And then so when I did Molokai, I didn't know that it's not a downwinder. I didn't even know to think about charting the course or figuring out the conditions or whatever. I just didn't even know. So I got blown way south. Like by the time I reached Portlock, I was probably 3 miles off the coast. And as you know, like that corner is really brutal. So I made it across the channel really fast because I was just like going with the waves and with the wind, which anyone who's done Molokai will tell you is a huge mistake. Yeah. So now I'm three miles off the coast, and then I'm just like hammering upwind for like hours. And then there's a 9-hour cutoff for Molokai. So if you're not at Portlock Point at 8 hours, they pull you from the race. So I had finally gotten to Portlock Point, and it was like just over 8 hours. And then so Mike Takahashi and Carl Kim, the race directors, they came and tried to pull me out. And I was a little stubborn at that point, and so I like refused to get in the boat.
Shocking.
And I'm really sorry if you're listening, Mike and Carl. I really apologize. I don't think that Mike Takahashi has still forgiven me. He's very nice to me still, but I know that he's still hasn't forgiven me. I don't condone this behavior, by the way. But then they went to my boat and talked to Sonia, my friend who I had mentioned before, and they're like, "Hey, can you talk some sense into her?" And she's like, "Dude,
good luck.
If you want to go talk to that, then you go talk to that. But I'm not getting anywhere near her right now. Like, good luck." And so then they just like left me alone. But what's cool is I made it into the finish at 8:54, so just under the 9 hours. So I did make the cutoff. And what was funny is they were already like presenting Jamie Mitchell with his winner award, and they had to like stop the award ceremony for me to come in. But so
good. That's the way it should be. Jamie, he won 10.
Who cares about
just
Jamie?
One more year for him to wait.
Jamie
he can
Mitchell.
wait 5 minutes.
But what's funny is I think that I have the record for the slowest anyone has ever crossed the channel within the time. So I'm officially the slowest winner in history. And nobody can take that away from me.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I love
it.
that
story. But listen, so I started doing stand-up with Jimmy Terrell at the very beginning when it was brand new. The equipment was primitive. The boards were horrific, and that was for flat water. So the first boards for for anybody that's done, Molokai has been talked about a lot on here. I mean, between Danny Ching and maybe the best example of it was Johnny Puoke talks about it. He goes, Molokai is not a surfing race.
No.
He talks about all the things that it is, but it is not a surfing race. And so, and I've done it a few times, and I would have been behind you for sure. But stand up, even in flat water, think about it. Stand up paddling for 8 hours, almost 9 hours, even in the best, just stand up here for 9 hours. That's hard. Then paddle big, crazy water on primitive boards. Like, what an incredible accomplishment. That's amazing.
At the time, I didn't even know how big of an accomplishment it was, really. It was weird. It was like my brain was just like, I'm doing it. Like, I don't care if this takes me 5 days, I'm doing this. And so it was one of those things where when I finished, I still didn't realize the gravity of it until like years later when I started realizing that there's like a history to this thing, right? Like, and when you learn more about the history, it feels cool to be a part of it.
For sure.
Yeah. That's
amazing. And how many times did you end up doing Molokai on stand-up?
Someone asked me this the other day. I've done it 12 times total. I forget what the breakdown was. So I've done it. The only thing that I haven't done yet is solo prone, which I'm hoping to do next year.
You haven't done it surf ski yet, because I know you were thinking about doing that.
Well, yeah,
too.
this is a plan. Ooh, maybe we should have this conversation on the record so everybody can hear.
Here we go.
Something to think about for later. But I've done Molokai 12 times total. I had 10 in the race and then 2 just for fun.
Hallelujah. That's so great.
Yeah.
That's a body of water that you have to, again, one of the big conversations I've had with everybody, Keone Watson, John, all the super accomplished world-class paddlers. I always ask, like, could you train for that here? And they're like, no.
Yes,
I mean,
but no.
You can,
you
but
can.
not to be elite, not at that level.
It's hard to win.
It's hard to find those conditions.
Well, because the thing about Molokai is, which I'm sure all of these guys have already said, you could be the world's fastest paddler, but that doesn't matter. If you can't read the water and you don't know what the ocean's trying to tell you, like, you have to negotiate with it. It's a big 8-hour negotiation. So like it's just the ocean's giving you signs and signals and you have to be able to read them. And if you are a slow paddler who can read that much better than a faster paddler that can't, the slower paddler will win every time.
Yeah, that's great.
That's why it's fun, though, right? It's like a puzzle.
If you can figure it out.
Yes,
and if you spend enough time on that water to really figure it out. Mm-hmm. Like, every time I've done it, I've had my ass handed to me because I trained for it here, and I didn't have the kind of experience. Like, I can paddle, but I couldn't, like, and I can downwind. I'm okay.
Yeah.
But over there, I need to spend a lot more time.
It's all repetition too, right? The more time you spend in like the bigger water, the easier it gets.
Yeah. Well, listen, you not only paddled that channel 12 times. Can we talk about the big Hawaiian island adventure? Can you start at the beginning with that one?
Yeah, so we did a project called Destination 3 Degrees.
It's unbelievable, by the way, people.
In 2010. We had seen Laird Hamilton and Dave Kalama did this trip where they rode their bikes across the island and then paddled the channels. And then they did it in like 8 days. That's ridiculous and it's gnarly. But we're like, hey, the channel thing sounds fun. So at the time, Jenny Kalmbach had just won Battle of the Paddle. She was like one of the faster paddlers and she seemed really nice. She is really nice, but the reason I approached her about it, I was like, oh, she seems really cool and I think that we could get along. So I called her up and I was like, hey, don't say no. And I was like, what do you think about this? And she was like, immediately yes. So what we did is we paddled from the Big Island to Niihau, which is like the island up above Kauai. It's the local island above Kauai. And we paddled all the channels in between. And the goal was just to like not do like a speed record or anything. The time and whatever was irrelevant. But we wanted to get to all the islands and like have fun on all the islands, like go freediving and surfing and kind of see all the islands in a way that most people don't get to see them. So she said yes, and she was great. She's for as loosey-goosey as I am with things, she's very type A, so she was able to get funding and like make it happen. Like she very much like secured the trip for us, and so we had boats along the way and we just paddled all the channels. And Chris Aguilar came along. Jen Pelkey now, but she was Jen Holcomb at the time. She came along as like a writer, so she kind of did our like media stuff, and there was a photographer, Shannon Switzer, who she came to, and it was just a really fun trip. It took us six weeks. The longest paddle was from Oahu to Kauai. It took 16 hours. We had to paddle through the middle of the night.
It's 100 miles. Darn close, right?
It was 84.
So talk about real quickly, just for people's context, talk about the distance of each channel.
Okay, so the Alinui Haha channel, which is the one between the Big Island and Maui, that one's about 50 miles. There is a documentary about this, and if you watch it, I have a pretty aggressive mental breakdown in that first channel, which if you
I was going to ask you about that.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah, my favorite thing to talk about. I love it so much. But it was a big learning experience. So I have this big meltdown in the first channel, right? And then that one's 50 miles, so that one took about 9 hours. Then we had Maui to... there's like Maui to Molokai was super fun.
That's a great path.
Such a fun run. And then we did, before we did that, we did Maui to Lanai and then Maui to Molokini. So we just paddled like kind of all the fun ones. I think we did Molokini first and then Lanai and then Maui to Molokai. And then we did Molokai to Oahu. And out of all of the Molokai to Oahu experiences that I've had, that one was for sure the most fun. Just because it was...
Conditions were good?
Conditions were good. We saw pilot whales. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this trip is because my dad had said he always wanted to like go on a boat in between all the islands, and I was like, well, cool, let's go do that thing then. So he was on the trip, and
he was on the trip.
Yeah, he came for the whole thing. It was so cool. And then in the Molokai Channel at one point our boat just like veered off. So a friend of mine, Jeff Muir, he's always been my my escort boat guy for Molokai, and he's a big fisherman, and my dad was too. And as soon as they veered off, I knew exactly where they were going because they had like spotted fish or whatever. And then I remember Jenny and I were like paddling next to each other. She's like, "Where'd they go? I can't believe they left us." I was like, "They're going to have their fun. It's fine. They'll be back." And when they came back, my dad had like a big mahi-mahi on a gaff, and he like held it up, and the smile on his face was so awesome. And it was like one of my favorite moments because they got to like have fun in the channel too for the first time instead of just sitting there. You know how it is being on boat, like the escort boat is not a fun place to be during Molokai.
Put me in the water.
100%. So that one was fun. And then we did Oahu to Kauai. That was the overnight one.
How was that? It's a long way.
It was a lot. My body, when we hit Kauai, broke out into like head to toe hives from like the stress.
Really?
Yeah. Well, just because we had planned this whole thing, and we had planned it all around a full moon. So we knew that Oahu to Kauai, when Laird Hamilton, Dave Kalama did it, it took them 24 hours. Their conditions were like horrendous. The ocean gave us a gift though. Ocean was like, okay, you guys have worked hard, we'll allow it. So we got really lucky. But before we got lucky, a big storm had come in. So we got a call the day before we were supposed to do it, and our boat guys, because we had two boats, one in front of us and one behind us, they were like, "It's too dangerous out there. We can't take you. There's a storm coming in." And so our whole thing was like unraveling. And so we were like, well, what do we need to do to get this going? They're like, well, so you can either wait out the storm, which we don't know how long it's going to be, and we don't know how long it's going to take, or we were supposed to leave at midnight. You guys can leave at 2:30, paddle through the night, hopefully make it there the next morning before the storm comes in. So we're like, great, let's do that. So we left at like 2:30 in the afternoon. We paddle like through the sunset. As the sun's going down, like this big tiger shark swims underneath both of our boards, and we look at each other and we're like, oh my God. And then, so because it was stormy, our full moon that we had planned this whole adventure around was gone. So it was just dark. And there was big swell. I mean, you could hear the waves coming, and they were coming from the side. You could hear them coming, and you knew you're just going to get like mowed over. So you'd hear this big wave coming, and you just like brace for impact, and then you just like pick yourself up and keep going. And we just followed the lights of the boat in front of us. Jeff Chang came along and he paddled a fair bit of that channel with us, but he ended up getting out early because he's such a good guy that he was like, I felt like I was holding you guys back.
Wow.
So he ended his own adventure early because he was like, I don't want to hold you two up.
Right.
He wasn't, by the way, but like that's neither here nor there.
So tell me about paddling that channel with those conditions at night with the moon blocked. I mean, that's stand-up paddling in open water is hard in the best of conditions. So what's it like that full sensory deprivation?
Well, because we had the light of the boat in front of us, your world becomes very small. So it's actually kind of easier in a way mentally, I think, to paddle that way, or at least it was for me because I wasn't looking at the destination at all. I didn't care about the destination.
You're looking right in front of the nose of your board.
My whole world for 16 hours was 5 feet in front of my face. And, there was a good spot behind the boat and then there was like an unpleasant spot because, wakes or whatever. So Jenny and I would keep like pushing each other like out of the good spot. And so we were like jockeying for position the whole time because it was a really challenging paddle. And I do remember at like 4 a.m., both of us laid down on our boards and looked up and it was just like, it had cleared a little. So it was just like stars. And it was amazing. And that moment was really cool. Like we were both just like laying there and it's like, I can't believe we're doing this. This is so awesome. And then we had a conversation at that time. We're like, how are you doing? Like, how are you doing? And both of us were like, yeah, not great. But the one thing that we kept reminding each other is that eventually the sun will come up. The sun has to come up. I don't know when we're going to get there, but we do know that the way the world works, the sun will come up at some point. So we just kind of looked forward to the sun coming up. And when it did, like Kauai was right there and we were outside like the buoy and we were close. It was pretty awesome.
Wow. And it's amazing. And I've watched the movie. What's the name of the movie? Where can people find it?
It's Destination 3 Degrees, and I think you can rent it on Amazon. Is that right?
I believe so.
I haven't watched it since 2010.
Really?
Yeah.
It's so rad. What a cool, when you guys finished that, what mark did that leave on you, if anything, or how did you feel about, it's a massive accomplishment.
Yes. But
you're going to downplay it, huh?
No,
You're
well,
like, eh.
It's like I tell people are doing cool stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. Like whoever you talk to, not whoever, I would say that in our friend group, the people that we're friends with, go ask them what's the coolest thing they've ever done. And they've got a story that's wild. Guaranteed. For sure. You've done long stuff. You go on Saturday morning and you paddle 20 miles for fun. That's not normal.
But it's fun.
Well, for you, it's type 2 fun. Yeah. But
hold on. Okay. All
we
right.
couldn't get through this without saying type 2 fun.
Well, okay.
I'm sure it was on your list, but
it was. And it absolutely was. Okay, so I'm guessing a lot of people know the terms type 1, type 2, type 3 fun, but I had never heard of it before you mentioned it to me, I don't know, a year or two ago. Can you walk people through type 1, type 2, type 3 fun?
Yes. In the adventure world, there is a fun scale. So type 1 fun is fun to do and fun to remember. It's no stress, no anxiety. It's like sitting around a campfire with your friends, having a beer or having a coffee or doing something that you really like to do that is just easy for you. Type 2 fun is the type of fun that's not necessarily that fun while it's happening, but immediately when it's over, you're like, that was awesome and I can't wait to do it again. And then there's type 3 fun, which is where we always tell people in the classes that that's the type of fun where you have to like eat your socks to survive. Not fun to do, not fun to remember, not a lot redeeming about it. But what's cool about type 2 fun is type 2 fun is the fun that pushes you forward. So it might not be super enjoyable the whole time that you're doing it, but it does it opens up a whole level. It's like leveling up, right? One example that Sydney Terrell, she likes to say to people is when she was 9, she did junior guards and they do a pier jump at the end of the summer. So she was super scared to do the pier jump. So she like jumps off the pier, or the first time she's like standing on the edge of the pier and then they tap her shoulder and she's all scared and she jumps off. And then as soon as she hits the water, she was like, that was so fun. I can't wait to do it again. So for the rest of the summer, she did all these pier jumps. Then it was like Shake Day on the last day, and any junior guard parent will tell you that Shake Day is a very big deal. You go to Ruby's and you have a shake, and it's awesome. It's the best day ever. With Shake Day, they did a pier jump, but for whatever reason, instead of like looking at the horizon, she looked down, she did a big belly flop. And so in that moment, it unraveled any like personal growth that she had done throughout the summer and making this thing not scary. One single bad experience like shrunk her zone again so that now it was like a scary thing again. So zone or type 2 fun is a really important because it will like grow your stretch zone to include things that were once scary. But if you go into the type 3 fun, then it will shrink it and make things like extra scary. So you got to be a little careful with the type 2 fun. But it's where all the growth happens, where you learn, it's where you grow. And for people like you and me and most of the people who are listening to this, I'm guessing, it's a very important part of their lives.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, type 2 fun is that first marathon. You're like, God, that sucked, but I'm doing it next year. I'm going to do it faster. Right? I'm a big believer, but I had never heard of it. I was like, oh my God, that is my language, 100%. There's another story we're going to talk about. You had talked about earlier offline, you told me that you're a total Survivor, the show Survivor nerd.
Yes, I am a giant Survivor nerd.
Why? What is it about that show or that, why? Because it fits right in, I think, with what we were just talking about.
Right.
Like
I mean, I love everything about it. I love the type 2 fun aspect of it for sure, but I really like the strategy. I like how people are able to manipulate each other into getting what they want. I'm not like that in my life, so I admire watching other people do it. And when you see somebody do it in sort of a masterful way, you're like, wow, that was crazy. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what drew me to it, but I'm like in the I listen to the Survivor podcast. I'm like so excited when it's like Survivor night. So, I don't know. I like watching people have adventures. It's cool. Sometimes when you're sitting and it's cold outside and I don't want to go paddle, I can watch Survivor and at least I'm watching someone else have like their life adventure, and I'm happy for them.
Talk about type 2 and type 3 fun. I mean, type 3, there's probably a lot of type 3 fun in Survivor.
I think so.
For sure. Well, and that brings us to, your own gnarly adventure. We'll talk about in a second, but there's a quote that I got from one of our mutual friends that I think speaks to everything we're talking about, and then we're going to go into the adventure. But it says, Morgan is that dangerous friend, in air quotes, dangerous friend. Morgan is that dangerous friend, the one that is all in no matter what and will always say yes.
Was that Wade?
Yes,
Wade
it was
Wade.
Wade.
I knew it was Wade.
But it speaks to this. So, and I love that quote. With that, because we all love people that say yes and go, that's what we train for.
Right.
Talk about the Tahiti multi-day adventure deal that you did. It's so gnarly.
So
hold on. Is it just as a foreshadow? Was that type 2 or type 3 fun?
It was definitely type 2.5 fun. It was 2.75. It was pretty close. It wasn't type 3 fun because I didn't have to get saved and I didn't die. I felt like I came kind of close. But one of the coolest things to come out of paddling was I met this man named Stefan Lambert. He is like an evil genius. He's this French man and he lives in French Polynesia. And he was putting on an event called Iron Mana in the beginning, but then and then it switched to Water Mana. So his whole thing is expect nothing, prepare for everything, and just deal with whatever happens. So he would bring me out to Tahiti, and then he would fly me out, which was super nice of him. And then we would do these events, and the events were open water swimming, paddling, stand-up, all of the ocean things. But the caveat is he wouldn't tell you what you were going to do or how long you were going to do. His whole thing, he'd be sitting there like smoking a cigarette on the beach and be like, okay, 5 minutes, we're going to swim 12 miles, ready, go. And
hold up, for real?
Really,
12 miles?
Yes, really. One time we swam 12 miles. And then like stuff like we prone paddled around the lagoon of Bora Bora, which is like 35 miles, like without any warning or whatever. It's all stuff like that. So his whole thing, he's the type 2 fun master, type 2.5 fun master. But the one that you're talking about, it was in Rangiroa, which is like one of the outlying, it's away from like the main Tahitian islands that most people know. And it's in the Tuamotus. And Rangiroa is this like big, I think it's the world's most giant lagoon. So it's like an atoll. So the lagoon in the atoll is about 100 miles across. We didn't paddle 100 miles, but
you swam it, didn't you?
No, not this time. But he basically started on a place where there was about a 40-mile stretch, so we kind of like kitty cornered it. And he was like, okay, the thing about this race, I'm getting ahead of myself, is that we were only allowed to eat or drink what we could find ourselves. Before we went on this 5-day adventure, he went through all of our bags and took all of the food out. I had like little coffee packets like stashed in my bag. He found them, he took them. He handed us one big water bottle and was like, this is what you get for 5 days, and the rest of whatever you're going to eat is what you can find or catch yourself.
Nobody can see me while you're talking about my mouth hanging open. Hold on.
Well, I didn't know this was happening either. My face looked exactly the same,
and
the
who
same
else?
way.
Who were the other people that were there for this? Like, how many people, and were they other elite people like yourself? Like, who was there?
Well, there were a bunch of Tahitians. My most favorite Tahitian friend, her name's Puatea Ellis. She was one of like the main women Tahitian paddlers. And then from the U.S., I think at that one, Grace Vanderbilt, who is like a world record, one of my most favorite people in the whole world. She's a world record holder, open water swimmer. She has the world record. She swam from Palos Verdes to Catalina, did a flip turn, and then came home again. So, like, you want to talk about gnarly people? Let's talk about. But that I digress. Anyway, you should talk to her later. Anyway.
Okay.
So she was
Rad,
there. And so I don't think there were a lot of. I think we were the only two like Americans there for that one. But we got to bring camping gear, and so we had our camping gear with us or whatever. And then when we would get there, we would set up camp, and it was very much like Survivor style. And then the Tahitians were teaching us how to like open coconuts, and I didn't have anything to spearfish with, but the Tahitians would go out and spearfish, and they taught us how to like cook them just full fish on the fire. It was such a cool experience. It was so awesome, but it was very, very depleting. Like I think I lost something like 18 pounds in 5 days. It was wild. I look like the people when they're done with Survivor after only like a week.
Well, there's a reason you like that show, because you've lived it yourself.
Right. But it's like Stefan is relentless in his like pursuit of like pain. He uses pain as a way to push you forward. And so we did that. The first the first thing that we did was like a 40-mile downwinder. And then when we got there, he's like, "Okay, swim race time." We're like, "What do you mean swim race time? It's nap time." And he's like, "No, it's not." And then whatever. So for 5 days, we did all of these different like open water events. And then on the last day, we did what he calls explorer things. So we paddled outside the reef along to like a starting point, and that took like 5 hours. So for like 5 hours, we all paddled together as a group. And then when we got to whatever starting point he had figured out that we should start at, he was like, "Okay, cool. Well, one last event." And by this point, the wind had picked up. It was probably like 20, 25 knot winds. And the group is together, and he's on a boat, and he's like, "See over there, see those palm trees?" And the palm trees are like this big. They're tiny. He's like, "Yeah, your job is to get there." He's like, "I don't care how you do it, just get there. Ready, go." And so as he's explaining this, like I was so tired that I like involuntarily like started crying, like tears started running down my face. I was like, "Oh my God, this is how it ends." And so we all start going, and it was directly upwind. So we're on stand up. So we're just like hammering upwind. And then I was so depleted at that time that I kept passing out and like falling into the water. And when I would fall into the water, it would wake me back up again. And then I was like, this is really dangerous. And I was like, this is like the first time that in the ocean that I don't really feel that safe. So, and during these events, there's no safety boats, there's whatever. It's just full on like gnarly style. So I was like, the way I see it, I have two options. I can keep going the way I'm going, and like maybe I fall, maybe I hit my head, maybe I die alone at sea, or I can negotiate with the ocean, use it to my advantage, go downwind, and then at least I can paddle along the coast near the beach. And if I do that, at least like if I'm gonna die, I can go lay on the beach, and somebody hopefully will eventually find me. So I eventually chose to make that choice. So I turn around, go downwind, and when I reached the beach, I saw Puatea, the Tahitian woman. She had kind of made the same decision. Oh. She's like the most prolific water woman I've ever met. It's like she's Moana. Like she can, when Moana's a baby and the ocean like parts for her, that's like Puatea. Wow. But so to her credit, she was still racing at that point. So I was not okay, and I was like, "Oh my God, there's Pua. I can paddle with her." And then she saw me, and so she starts speeding up, and I was like, "No,
please help.
No, don't speed up." And then so eventually I was able to like get to her. And then when I got to her, she kind of sat down, and I was like, "Pua, like, I'm not okay. Will you paddle with me?" And we weren't great friends at that point. And then she was like, "Oh, good." She was like, "I'm tired too." And then so for the next like 5-6 hours, she and I just paddled side by side.
And you had no water, no nothing.
No, I mean, her brother came at one point, and he had gotten a coconut, and he brought it out to us. So we basically were drinking coconut water. That's probably why I lost so much weight. I mean, you can imagine what it does to your like gastrointestinal system. But yeah, so I mean, And then we eventually get to the finish line or whatever, but there was like a race involved, right? Because we were racing for miles to come back to Tahiti. So but she was racing this other Tahitian woman, and we both knew that if I beat her, it was going to put her out of contention for coming to Battle of the Paddle, which was their like qualifying thing at the time. So we both knew that she needed to win. So I was like, Pua, you got to go. And she was like, no, sister, we do it together. I was like, I will sit down right here. I was like, you better go win this thing, because like for me, it's miles. For you, it's like a trip. So like, please go. And so we've been like really good friends ever since, which is my favorite takeaway from that particular trip. But that one was a rough one. That was
sounds
gnarly.
That sounds like type 5 fun.
It was so bad that he hasn't done it since, because it was dangerous. Like
no. Nobody died. That's great.
Nobody died.
Dude, so gnarly. See, I like to go do a big adventure and then go home and sleep in my bed.
Right.
Or whatever. I don't.
You don't want to sleep in your tent on the ground?
Survivor does not interest me. Like I'm a fair weather endurance guy. Like that's so gnarly. That I've heard bits and pieces. I hadn't heard that whole thing, but so heavy, Morgan. Like crazy.
It's funny how in our everyday lives, though, how quickly we turn into babies, though. When I'm at home and I have like all of this stuff at my disposal, I'm like, ugh, my blankie is wrinkled in the wrong way. And then meanwhile, you go out and are sleeping on the ground somewhere and that feels normal. But I think that's why that kind of stuff is important, because then when your like blankie is wrinkled in the wrong way, when you're watching Survivor on the couch, it like gives you a little bit of perspective, which I like.
There's a book called The Comfort Crisis.
I love that book.
Okay, so we've read the same thing. I mean, listen, I like my comfy bed and air-conditioned house and this and that, but like you got to push it, because if you spend your whole life doing that, but what you did in Tahiti is far beyond me and most humans. Like that's gnarly.
To be fair, though, I don't know that I would have signed up to do what we did. And that's his whole point, right? Like if you prepare yourself and whatever, and he just likes to, and his whole thing is if I were to tell you what you're going to do, you're going to sit and stress about it for 2 weeks, or you might not show up. So that's why he doesn't tell you.
Yeah. Gnarly. Yeah. I guess that makes sense. If it's a bit of a misogi, which is, 2 rules of a misogi is it's got to be something so hard you might not finish it. And the second rule is you can't die.
Don't die.
Don't die. And real quickly, you've done some other rad stuff. Your Oregon Coast Paddle. You've done some sailing outrigger stuff. And you've done other racing. Like, does that just always fill your bucket? Are you still doing it at that kind of level today?
It's interesting. That's the kind of stuff, again, that makes me feel like a human. If I'm like suffering, I feel like I'm having the human experience, but there's a difference between everyday suffering and like stuff that happens in your life that's terrible, or like self-induced suffering out in the ocean. So it's like fun suffering, but, when my dad passed away, I actually like kind of hit a little bit of like an adventure wall, because that was the stuff that we always used to do together. And so he had ALS, so watching him go downhill was like a really big like mental head trip. And so for a long time, I felt really guilty that I was like, if I was out doing adventures, it was like I felt bad because, of the state of it or whatever. But I feel like I finally turned the corner on that, where I see it more as like I'm honoring his legacy by continuing to do adventures, which is kind of where the open water stuff came in. But for a minute, I sort of like lost myself in the adventure, and I didn't want to do it. I
really?
didn't want anything to do with it, because I just felt weird about it. I've overcome that now, which is nice, but it took a minute. And so I have some big adventures that I would like to do, and so I'm trying to motivate to get those done. And by motivating, I mean I'm trying to wrangle people into doing them with me, which we have talked about. You said we were going to talk about on the podcast to be. I don't
know. We might run out of time.
Really?
We got other stuff to talk.
We don't have time.
We'll see. But listen, I think it's great to have goals. I mean, especially when you've done the type of stuff that you've done. I've learned, and other people that I train with, especially their first time doing something big, I'm like the Vessel Vixens were in here, 4 women that did the Bend this year. That was their big goal. But before it, I was like, so what's next? And they're like, what do you mean? We're just trying to get to this. I was like, no, you got to have what's next. Because if you spent all your time focused on this one goal, when you finish it, I'm not permitted to say it, but it's almost like a postpartum type thing. You're like, okay, I finished this. Now I feel empty. What am I missing? And so afterward, they're like, you're right. Like so they've got a goal. But you got to have goals, not just for fun, but to like, you got to have that motivation to continue to pursue
for sure
growth and development.
It's so easy to get complacent. It's so easy. And like I said, I went through it. Like after my dad, it was kind of like an excuse for me to be lazy. And then I leaned way hard into the lazy. But then what I noticed is I was sad all the time. I was like depressed. I had all this like grief issues, but I wasn't doing the thing that made me feel like a human. So like back to that like run in Hawaii that I did by myself, it was a really like strong reminder of like, this is why this is important.
It's so neat. Well, let's use this opportunity to pivot into exactly the stuff we're talking about. You mentioned open water. We've talked about the water groms. You're wearing the waterlogged shirt. You've talked about some of the people. Let's talk about today, the things you're doing and the why you're doing them. So real quick, let's talk about, because it kind of bridges the gap. You mentioned open water. Danny Nichols, his organization that we've both done some stuff with. Can you talk about your role with them and what that's been and why?
Yeah, so open water came at a really important part of my life. So I was introduced to Danny in the height of like my depression around like the dad thing. And then, so I saw what they were doing. Vince Longo, my partner, he was doing this channel crossing that they do every year on November 11th. So on Veterans Day, they do a channel crossing where it's like an active mentorship thing. So they take vets and first responders who want to go use the ocean as a way to sort of like push them forward or deal with whatever it is that they're dealing with. They go cross the channel, and then the next year, that person that has like achieved crossing the channel brings in a mentee, and then they mentor them across the channel. So it's a really, really cool program. I love the idea of using the type 2 fun as a way to like deal with mental health issues, like because it's very like close to my own life. And so anyway, so this first year I watched Vince do it, and I had to sit and like pretend like I was all happy for him because I didn't get invited because I had never met Danny and it was his thing. And so I went and watched them on the beach or whatever. And as soon as I could, I like introduced myself to Danny, and I was like, "Hey, Danny," and told him who I was. And then he later figured out, I didn't tell him that I like to do the channel things. I was sort of like trying to stair step my way in. But he had gone home and like Googled me or whatever. And then he came back. He was like, "Oh my God, you have to come do this with us." And I was like, "I did it. I made it."
The side step work.
Yeah. And so since that time, he kind of put me in a position where new paddlers, I was able to like kind of teach them about things that I knew about it. And so I would cross the channel with everybody as sort of like a Sherpa in a way. Whereas like when people are having certain mental problems as they arise in channels, I try to maybe like distract them or talk them out of it, or maybe encourage them not to get on the boat, which I'm sure is a story that you like to tell. But the open water thing has become such an important part of my life because I have lived a life of like rainbows and butterflies for the most part. I don't know what it's like to have PTSD. I don't know what it's like to go through what they go through. So being able to be in the vicinity of these people who are like literally laying down their lives for other people has been like this life perspective thing that I think that I needed. So I'm so grateful for open water. I am not a military vet or a first responder, but I learned just as much as they do from my involvement with them. So it's like such a cool thing to be able to be a part of. I act as like a sweeper. So you too, we stay at the end, and then, we try to like gently nudge people forward when they think they can't do it, or
inspire, motivate, push a
sometimes
little bit.
You just need to chat to somebody. I was listening to you, and when your interview with Joe is like the advice that you had was find a friend, find somebody to paddle with. That's not how I operate. I'm like a solo hermit creature, but I have seen enough times that sometimes all people need is just somebody to talk to for a little bit.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be heavy. You can talk about TV shows. Doesn't matter. It just like you need it's nice to have a friend out there to distract you for a little bit. When we call it Kevin the Brain Dragon, that's the guy that steps in when for some reason when you're in the middle of the channel, your brain does this thing is like, hey, let's talk about all the things that are bothering you. You want to talk about them all right now? Like remember that time that you said, have a good flight to the flight attendant. Haha, that was stupid, right? Let's focus on that for a while. We call that guy Kevin, and Kevin the Brain Dragon shows up at various points in any channel crossing, and so we try to like talk people through dealing with Kevin.
Yeah. Listen, you just did a better job of articulating open water and our role in it, because I do the same thing. We're both out there kind of sweeping, and I'm fortunate to get to do that, and also with the Ben Carlson Foundation's crossing. I've loved over the years, you mentioned it earlier, racing has evolved to helping others get across, which is, we're going to go there right now with what you do. But you did a great job of articulating what they do. I'm not a first responder. I mean, I just love that group. They're so inspirational. But as I always say, this channel, Molokai channel, it's on the best of days, it's hard. And on the worst of days, it's really friggin' hard. And for some people, it's type 2, and for some, it's type 3.
Right.
But you were, I'll tell it very quickly because I want to get to some of this other stuff before we run out of time, but the Danny Nichols story. So Danny tells the story how 2 years ago, he was in a dark spot, 3 years ago, in a very dark spot out there. And it was very challenging conditions. He was on stand up. You were on an outrigger sweeping, and he's done. And you come up to him and he goes, I'm getting out, fuck this, I'm getting out, getting in the boat. And you're like, very calmly, hey, if you're gonna get in a boat, get in this boat. You can paddle this, I'll take that, and we're gonna get you across. And he tells the story much more detailed and eloquent than I do. But what happened was he continued, and you helped him rethink, and you helped him push Kevin back into the cave a little bit, right?
Well, myself included sometimes, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but when you're out there, sometimes you just have to have the meltdown and say that you can't. You're like, I can't do it. I can't do it. And you need somebody to validate you in that moment, right? You don't want to be crazy, and you don't want someone to be like, yeah, you can do whatever you want to do. But I'm like, the thing that I said to Danny, I was like, Danny, let's think about future us, right? 4 hours from now, everybody's going to be on the beach high-fiving, giving themselves hugs or whatever, because this thing that you created. And if you get out and get in the boat now, you're going to have to watch all these people have that moment, and all you're going to remember is that you didn't finish it up. I was like, do you really finish it up? And he didn't even want the canoe. He was like, oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. And then he just like stood back up again. But in those moments, and I've been there too, sometimes you just need to like have your 5-year-old tantrum moment and have like somebody coddle you a little bit. And then, although my way of coddling isn't, I'm not like, oh, I'm like you are not getting in the boat, Danny.
Yes, he tells the story very well about that, which I love. But listen, and that's great. And again, being a part of that is wonderful. So you've now taken that same kind of mindset of helping others. So you've got the open water folks, but let's talk about what you do with your organizations, with Waterlogged and with Water Groms. And keeping it kind of narrow, like what do you do and why?
So we have Waterlogged Adventures is an umbrella company for Water Groms is the kids program. Waterlogged is the adult program. What we do is we help people be more confident and comfortable underwater. So I kind of mentioned before, all of the things that I've done in my life have led me to this moment. Everything that I've ever done, my mom waking me up at 4 a.m. for swimming and being dedicated and determined, whatever, and the freediving and the surfing, what has resulted from that is I'm more comfortable in the water than I am on land, 100%. And with my dad too, like his legacy, he taught me how to be that way. Like he taught me how to be comfortable in a cave, freediving at 60 feet, whatever. We always used to do it together, and it was just fun. So now all of these skills that I've picked up along the way, we have created fun pool games for people to try underwater to increase their level of comfort and competence really underwater. And it's so fun. I became a PADI freedive instructor and instantly got bored with it because it was the same thing every time. You know, it was like going up and down a line, and it was fine, but it was certifying people to go to 30 feet, and that was it. So at the time, Sydney Terrell was 8.
Wow.
And so Jimmy's daughter. And they had hired me to be her swim coach, and her and her sister Addie, and then they hated swimming. They just like didn't like anything about it. So every time we would show up, it was like pulling teeth. So I was like, okay, listen, we're not going to get out of this. We need to like make you guys better swimmers. So instead of just making them do the black line, I was like, what happens if we do like some rock running or like CO2 tolerance or some underwater fun having things. And so Sydney became like the guinea pig, the OG water grom that we used to develop this program where we spend a lot of times with like the young surfers around here. So from like the 9 to 14-year-old age group, teaching them how to survive like surfing wipeouts and stuff. So it's just all about how to stay underwater longer and have more fun.
It's rad.
Because I love the water, and most people who come also love the water, but it's a little scarier than it is for me, I would say. And so we try to teach them how to not be quite as intimidated by it.
Yeah, it's so neat. Well, I got the experience to kind of watch it firsthand, kind of the waterlogged aspect. So you got the invitation with Open Water to be part of the United States Lifeguard Association conference in Oahu, and I got to come and be a part of it. It must have been pretty cool because you got up in front and presented to lifeguard chiefs from all over the country. and Hawaiian lifeguards, some of the best watermen in the world, and they were all doing your program.
You want to talk about type 3 fun? That was type 3
Was
fun
that
for me.
nerve-wracking
Oh
for
my
you?
God, I was so nervous for that one. Because, when I'm talking to kids, they don't know the difference. I could completely bonk and they would have no idea. But now all these people who like legitimately are good at everything and they do know what they're talking about, I was like, oh God, this is like a high stress situation. But it seemed pretty well received. And we kind of touched on how you can use breathing to regulate your state. So with like lifeguards and first responders in particular, they have all these like little traumatic moments that happen throughout their day. And for a lot of them, they don't want to go talk about their feelings. I'm the same way. I don't enjoy talking about my feelings. But what you can do is sit and breathe at the end of the night, and you can regulate your state and kind of use that as a way to like calm your mind or calm your body or bring yourself into like a parasympathetic state. And those same breathing techniques that you can use to calm yourself down are the same ones freedivers use to be calm and relaxed before or after a dive. So it's really cool to be able to use that freediving stuff and do it in like a everyday application. And that's been a really, really cool thing to like share with people. And it was, and then when you create pool games, Survivor again has been a big influence on me. So I watch a lot of like old Survivor where they used to have to do like underwater challenges. So we've sort of adapted what they did and like with knots and underwater tying or whatever. And so then you get people doing that, and now all of a sudden being underwater is fun because they have a goal and they have a puzzle, but you're still holding your breath and you still have to manage like how long you can handle that. So it was really cool to watch that particular group of people do it and be so excited about this stupid underwater game. I mean, we call it Naughty Squatty. It's like Reagan came up with that, but I mean, it's fun and it's like pretty rewarding to watch them do it.
Well, and it's really, thank you for that. It's really cool because you're doing it with kids, you're doing it with adults, but when you're talking about the impacts, and Danny Nichols is great at elaborating on the benefits of the CO2 tolerance and how it helps you, bring down your stress levels and really using it as a recovery tool. And that's what you're doing when you're working with open water. So it's really cool how you've been able to apply it to all these, these young surfers, these adults and first responders and veterans, et cetera, trying to navigate and mitigate the challenges from their past. Like, it's just really incredible. Who would have thought, And
it's a fun way to train too. What's cool is, we do weekly pool workouts and where we use freediving and like big wave surf training as a way to increase your CO2 tolerance. So increasing your body's tolerance to carbon dioxide makes you smarter, makes you faster, it makes you run more efficiently, it makes you calm down easier. Everything in your life will benefit from doing CO2 tolerance training. And for us and the people in our immediate friend circle, we're all water people, right? So instead of going to the gym and riding like an air bike or whatever for 45 minutes, let's go play fun pool games where it's like, we get to play Survivor for 2 hours and then we go home and you sleep great and your whole life is improved. So, and for kids in particular, it makes them focus better. School gets easier. Having the CO2 tolerance will actually make your brain function more efficiently. It'll just help your life in any capacity. It's pretty cool.
Well, as you know, I've been trying to, it hasn't worked in my schedule, but 2025 is my year of waterlogged with you for sure. And I really, Reef, my 13-year-old, he's one that I think would probably be resistant, but would get the most benefit from it.
But those are the most fun because we very frequently, like men will want to come take the class and they'll drag their like wives or girlfriends into the class and they'll be like, I'm just here to support my husband. I'm like, that's cool. Like, just wait in an hour, you're about to be kicking his ass. And it happens every single time. So with the ones who are resistant, that's where the fun having is really important. So the more fun you make it, you like distract them from doing this thing that, and then it becomes, remember when you were 5 and you're like, can I swim across this pool? Like every 5-year-old has tried to swim across a pool. So now you're kind of just creating a little bit more of a structured environment for them to do it. And it's our favorite thing is when kids in particular, they'll get across the pool and then they'll claim it. They'll like throw a fist, and that's 100% my favorite thing. I love it. I love it so much when that happens.
All right. I look forward to Reef claiming it with
Me
you
too.
in 25. If people want to find out more about the programs, Watergroms, Waterlogged, how do people find you?
The easiest way is the website, which is morganismyname.com.
Morganismyname.com.
It was my blog a long time ago, and then I just kept it because I liked it. You can also find it at watergroms.com if you'd like to go the professional way, but Morgan is my name is a pretty easy thing to remember. Yeah. And then we're on Instagram. Watergroms is at Watergroms, and Waterlogged is at Waterlogged_adventures.
Got it. Rad. I hope people go. And we mentioned already where people could find the movies or the documentaries about you. There's a lot out there if you Google Morgan.
I think if you Google it, I haven't done it. Like I said, I had that big meltdown in that first channel, which has prevented me from watching. I just don't even want to watch it. I learned a lot from it though. So that's a conversation for a different time.
Okay,
but
that's fair.
The meltdown definitely had its place. And it was the biggest takeaway is I made that channel a nightmare for myself, and my brain did that to myself. So that's
Kevin.
the takeaway is I let Kevin take over, and boy, did he take over. For 9 hours, I was completely miserable, and I completely did that to myself. And I think humans, we do that a lot.
And yet you got it done, and look where you are today.
Yeah, well, Jenny, she dragged me through that thing. She was like, get up. Jenny and my dad, both of them were like, my dad was like, you are embarrassing yourself. You need to get up and make it across. And I was like, fine, but I'm going to suffer the whole time.
But it talks about the resilience, the benefit of having people to train with, even if you're a hermit.
That is true.
Everything we were talking, and you overcame it.
You need a team,
but that's the world today. And again, if everything was butterflies and unicorns on that crossing, you wouldn't have that story, you wouldn't have that memory, you wouldn't have gotten that growth. So I think so much what we're talking about with type 2 fun, type 2.75 fun, as you creep up towards type 3 fun, survivor, all the things you've done have got you here. And you learn, that's the compounding value of doing hard things is you get, just like the underwater, you get better and better at it and more resilient, and you get all the benefits from it. And pretty soon you're talking story on podcast, telling the whole thing.
Yeah, the water's a great teacher. It's where, it's everything for me. It's I'm not a religious person, but it's where I go to be spiritual or whatever. It's just the water is such a important part of, I think, all of our lives. And it's, I'm just so grateful that we have it.
Hallelujah. Well, Morgan, thank you so much for being here. Super fun. Your story's rad. You're a great storyteller.
Thanks
and
for
I can't
having me.
wait for people checking it all out.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You got it. Thank you.